The episode begins with a strange woman named Rukmini laughing as she stands on a statue. She says she is the protector of the Whip of Endless Flame and tries to fight Poe and Luthera, but she is too weak. She suddenly appears behind them and takes the whip. Luthera says they're not trying to steal the whip but protect it, and she doesn't believe them. She says there's no way out of the cave, and Poe panics as he remembers his dad. Poe and Luthera walk with Rukmini, and she says she's devoted her entire life to protecting the whip. Rukmini says she's never left the cave, and they see some figures she calls her friends. Luthera suggests they use the whip to escape, but Rukmini says the whip's power doesn't work in the cave. Luthera offers to take responsibility for guarding the whip, but she refuses and says they can't handle it. She mentions a cave-in that occurred several years ago and says they might form an exit through it. Poe tells Luthera that they should impress Rukmini so she can give them the whip, and Luthera agrees. Meanwhile, Klaus and Veruca walk with the stag named Colin and make fun of his name. He refuses to mingle with them and they continue walking. Poe and Luthera walk with Rukmini and arrive at a ledge. They realize they'll have to swing on a vine to get to the other side. Luthera carries Rukmini and swings to the other side while Poe watches. She gives him the vine and he tries to swing, but suddenly remembers when he was a baby. His dad fed him and made him promise to always return home. Poe realizes he's hanging on the vine and tries to swing to the other side but falls to the ground. He survives the fall and Luthera and Rukmini go to him. Poe gets frightened as he sees some skeletons and Luthera calms him. The skeletons then come to life, and they are forced to fight them off. Klaus and Veruca follow Colin and try to steal the map from him. He excuses himself and Veruca steals his journal and not the map. Luthera and Rukmini fight the skeletons and Poe tries running away. Luthera talks to him and he says he misses his home. She assures him that they'll leave the cave and he fights with her. They defeat the skeletons and help Rukmini. She realizes they're worthy and gives Luthera the whip. She decides to leave the cave with them and they walk into a giant boulder that blocks the entrance. Poe and Luthera struggle to open it and Rukmini runs out. Luthera goes through the hole, but a skeleton holds Poe's leg and prevents him from escaping as the door shuts. Colin follows the map and realizes the city is gone. He accidentally rolls down a sandhill and injures his leg. Veruca tries to take the map from him, but he protects it. She suggests they abandon him, but Klaus refuses. He decides to use a potion to leak Colin, and Colin realizes they are mages. He stands up in anger and proceeds to attack them. Meanwhile, Luthera tries to use the whip to free Poe, but it doesn't work. Rukmini laughs behind her and celebrates her freedom. Poe gets frustrated because he's trapped and tries to calm himself. A figment of his anxiety takes the form of his dad and Poe talks to him. He tells Poe he has more strength in his right thumb than his whole body. Poe realizes he still has a piece of the gauntlet and decides to use it. Luthera realizes that Rukmini is not the whip's guardian, but a treasure hunter. Rukmini reveals to have given her a fake whip and attacks her with the real one. Luthera dodges the attacks and tries fighting back. Poe activates the thumb and strikes the boulder. The gauntlet activates as Veruca wears it and it moves her around. Poe generates momentum and destroys the boulder, while the gauntlet drags Veruca and Klaus away as Colin attacks. Luthera informs Poe that Rukmini deceived them and she escapes with the whip. Luthera gets upset because they lost another legendary weapon, and Poe tells her he can activate the thumb. They realize that the tumble can summon the gauntlet and bring it to them. Klaus and Veruca stand up and see that Colin isn't close to them. She tends to her injured brother and they walk into the woods. Veruca staring at the moon. The queen walks to her and says she's in need of a royal flush. Veruca beginning to use her powers to mix several items, and the queen says she wants to appoint a man named Alfred as the master of war. Veruca doesn't like the idea and tells the queen she just wants the best for her. In the present, Veruca tries to use her powers on a plant, but it doesn't work, and she gets upset. Klaus says they have to keep moving but suddenly pass out due to his injury. Veruca then stands up and drags him as they continue moving. Luthera trains in the woods and stares at her reflection on the sword. Poe tries to sneak up on her, but she throws him to the ground. Poe notices that she's not happy and asks if she's hungry. She tells him this is their closest chance to retrieve the gauntlet and says they have to get things right. Poe promises not to let her down and she decides to give him his next lesson in knighthood. Veruca wakes Klaus up and he calls her a crazy animal. She tries to use her powers again but is unable to, and she becomes sad. A lady walks by as she harvests mushrooms and Veruca goes to her with a blade. She forces the lady to tell her where her secret town is. Luthera talks to Poe and tells him she will advance him to the level of squire if he can pass the training. She puts wood around his hand and says he has to learn how to disarm his opponent. The wood serves as a gauntlet and she shows him a move to remove it. She tries taking the wood off as they spar, but Poe stops her and escapes. Luthera complains because he easily escapes her technique and says they should switch roles. She tries to escape, but Poe uses his belly to push and disarm her. She asks him if the belly move is a kung fu move, and he says whatever a kung fu master does is a kung fu move. Meanwhile, Veruca forces the lady named Changpu to pull the car. They arrive at her secret village and the villagers see her as she enters. Veruca emerges and realizes there are only women in the town. Their leader emerges and says she speaks for the Yao Jing. Veruca realizes that the women don't want to attack her and they see Klaus on the wagon. She decides to follow their leader as Changpu drags the wagon with Klaus. Later, Klaus wakes up and sees the woman staring at him. He wonders where he is and sees Veruca drinking tea. The leader says Yao Jing hasn't sent a traveler in months, and Klaus drinks some tea. He and Veruca suddenly get drowsy and realize there's something in the tea. The leader says they usually don't allow men in their town, but Klaus arrived during their harvest. She takes Veruca's weapons and leaves the room as Veruca tells Klaus they are the harvest. Poe continues training with Luthera and she complains. She says that it's not his fault and talks about how she's waited to defeat Klaus and Veruca for 15 years. She feels she won't be able to defeat them if her attacks aren't perfect and feels discouraged. Poe motivates her and encourages her to continue training. Veruca struggles to break free from her restraints but is unable to. Klaus suggests she uses her powers and Veruca talks about how she lost her connection with the earth. The leader opens the door and instructs some women to take Klaus. She tells Veruca not to worry because she will be dessert. Veruca remembers when she was arrested by the Queen's guards for killing Alfred. The guards put her in a cell and blocked the moonlight from entering inside. 15 years passed and Klaus eventually breaks her out. He informs her that the other mages are gone and they are the only ones left. Veruca looks out the window and sees the moon. She then begins to control some vines and realizes her powers have been restored. The leader and the other women prepare to put Klaus in a pot of boiling soup, and Veruca emerges while standing on some vines. She uses the vines to attack the women and grabs the leader. The leader reveals that she made up the Yao Jing, and Veruca says she is worse. She throws the leader into the pot, and she jumps out. Poe sneaks up on Luthera as they spar, and she gets upset because she can't defeat Poe. He cheers her up and says not all plans are carried out perfectly. Meanwhile, Veruca retrieves the gauntlet and destroys the town. The finger activates and Poe offers Luthera his hand. She grabs his hand and the gauntlet summons the finger, dragging them to Veruca and Klaus. Poe sees Klaus and rushes to him while Veruca tries to attack Luthera. Poe stands in front of her while holding Klaus, and Luthera grabs the gauntlet. She uses her belly to hit Veruca away and separates her from the gauntlet. Veruca tries to use her powers, but the sun rises and she's unable to. Poe and Luthera tie the siblings, and Luthera thanks Poe for his kung fu lessons. Veruca says she was in darkness for 15 years, and all she needs is for nightfall to arrive. The Emperor talking to Mr. Ping and saying he's the only one he can use to get Poe. Ping refuses to give up information on his son and says he'd rather die. The Emperor is surprised because Ping puts up a fight and says Ping is a common cook. Ping gets angry because of the Emperor's statement and says he's not a common cook. He talks about how several new restaurants shut down within the first year and it's not easy being a cook. A guard enters as some other guards carry Ping away and tell the Emperor that there's a monkey that wants to sell a strange whip to him. The Emperor gets interested and Rukmini enters the palace. Poe talks to Luthera and she says their partnership will have to end because their mission is over. Poe tries to hug her, but she refuses and begins to walk away. He rushes to her and says their mission isn't over because he promised to take her around China. He informs her he knows where the whip is and will retrieve it before returning the gauntlet. Veruca and Klaus overhear their conversation and she laughs. Rukmini talks to the Emperor and says the weapon she wants to sell can defeat any foe. She says it's not cheap and tells the Emperor she won't leave without being paid half of China's treasury. The Emperor and his guards laugh at her but realize she's serious. He asks her where the weapon is and she says it's the stick. The Emperor thinks she's joking and asks his guards to take her away. The guards approach her but the staff transforms into the whip. Rukmini uses the whip to attack the guards as the Emperor watches and he's impressed. He gets interested in her deal and she says she wants half the treasury. Poe and Luthera walk to a river where they see two boats. They see a fancy boat and talk to the pig who's renting it. He sees that Poe is wanted by the Emperor and gets scared. Poe assures him that he's a good guy, but Klaus and Veruca make Poe sound like a villain. The pig refuses to rent the boat and a chicken emerges. He tells them he hates the government and allows them to rent his boat. Poe and the others enter the boat and begin their journey down the river. Luthera mentions that the boat is moving slowly and Poe assures her it's the fastest way to get to the docks. An old goat walks past them and Luthera continues complaining about how slow the boat is. Klaus tells Veruca to focus because they have to escape and Luthera tells them not to think about it. They arrive at a festival that evening and some people say they're preparing for the Moon Festival. Veruca is happy because the moon allows her to use her powers. Poe says he was not aware of the Moon Festival and they try to navigate through the boats. None of the boats move and Veruca tells Klaus she can't use her powers when they're on the water. He tells her to calm down and says he has a plan as he stares at some soldiers. Luthera suggests they walk as they continue the journey and Klaus and Veruca agree. Poe says using the boat will be quicker and suggests they enjoy the festival. Luthera reluctantly agrees to relax a little and tries to have fun with Poe. She admits that the day was fun after eating, and Klaus and Veruca alert some guards while saying they were kidnapped. The guards realize that Poe's the dragon master and rush to apprehend him. Poe assures the guards that Klaus and Veruca are lying and says he is on the way to return the gauntlet to the Emperor. He then says he loves the Emperor, but the guard sees a flag against the Emperor on his boat and fails to believe him. Some people tell the guards that Poe stole from them, and Poe says they are lying. He instructs Luthera to paddle as he pushes the guards away, and they realize Klaus and Veruca set them up. They knock down several soldiers and boats as they fight, and the moon rises. A man informs everyone of the moon, and they get distracted while staring at it. Poe and the others run into the woods as everyone is distracted. The soldiers then search for them, but they hide in the woods and continue moving. Poe laments about how bad the day went and says it wasn't part of his plan. Luthera realizes that Poe knew about the Moon Festival and he says he wanted to have fun with her before she returned to England. He says he wants her to have something she'll remember from China, and Luthera tells him that they aren't friends. Poe is sad as he hears what she says, and she says their mission has come to an end. Veruca uses her powers to take a dagger from Luthera and snatch the gauntlet from Poe. She uses her vines to hold Poe while Luthera fights them off. Luthera rushes to Klaus to attack him, but Veruca threatens to use the gauntlet on Poe. He tells her not to let him be the reason why the siblings get another weapon and apologize for lying to her. Luthera tells Klaus and Veruca that Rukmini took the whip and is on her way to the Emperor to sell it. The siblings believe her and tie her and Poe with vines as they leave. She then cuts the vines with her sword, freeing herself and Poe. Luthera tells Poe that the whip and the gauntlet will be at the Emperor's palace, and they'll be able to get both of them at the same time. She says their mission isn't over and they continue their journey. Meanwhile, the guards gather several piles of gold for Rukmini and she is happy. The Emperor asks her for the whip and she says she'll give him when she's outside. He tells her that she won't be going outside and several guards surround her. He instructs them to attack her and she uses the whip to defend herself and fight back. Poe and Luthera climbing up a mountain that leads to the Emperor's palace. Poe says he wishes the lift were working and asks how they are sure that Klaus and Veruca have arrived at the palace. They then hear Veruca laughing at a distance and Luthera says she's sure that the siblings are there. Klaus climbs up the mountain and Veruca laughs as she moves around. Klaus tells her to focus and she asks him how they are sure that Rukmini is in the palace. They then hear whips and screams from the palace and Klaus tells her he's sure. Rukmini moves around as she picks several gold pieces and evades the guards. She flips a coin and destroys it and several pillars knocking down the guards. Rukmini moves to the door and laughs, but a trap door opens and she falls in it. The Emperor retrieves the whip before it falls and promotes the guard who brought up the idea of a trapdoor. He walks into his throne and says he'll be able to capture Po himself with the whip. Klaus and Veruca get to the palace and realize that Po and Luthera are following them. They decide to allow Po and Luthera to handle the Emperor while they take them out afterward. Po and Luthera get to the top of the mountain and enter the palace. They see that the Emperor is with the whip and he says Rukmini tried to play him. He asks Luthera who she is and Po introduces her as a knight from England. He tells the Emperor about their journey and mission. And everyone gets bored at how long Po talks. The Emperor asks if he's meant to believe that they have been attacking his soldiers and destroying towns because they're chasing other criminals, and Po says he has to believe them. He says they can't trust Luthera's word because she is a knight, and Colin barges into the palace as he says she isn't a knight. The Emperor asks who he is, and Colin says he is a knight from England. He says that Luthera isn't a knight and shows the Emperor a decree for her arrest, signed by the Queen. Colin says Luthera stole her armor and the sword from the night barracks in London. The Emperor gives the permission to use his personal ship to take Luthera to England, and Po is confused. Luthera tells him she isn't a knight, and Colin takes her out of the building. The guards throw Po into a cell and he sees that Wyman has been demoted to a dungeon guard. Wyman blames Po for his situation and laughs at him as he walks away. Po begins to hear his dad's voice and thinks it's imaginary. He turns around and sees his dad in another cell. Mr. Ping tells Po that Emperor tried to force him to give up Po's location, but he didn't talk. He asks Po if he found what he was looking for, and Po frowns. Colin moves with Luthera and mentions her crimes, as he says she should have known she'd be apprehended. She tells him she came to China for revenge and says that Klaus and Veruca are in China. Colin doesn't know who they are, and she tells him that they are mages who killed Alfred. She says they possess a gauntlet that can destroy cities, and Colin realizes who they are. Po tries to break out of his cell as he tells Mr. Ping that Luthera lied to him. They see Rukmini, and Mr. Ping says she is an expert at escaping from places. She tells Po that she'll take the whip if she helps them escape, and he reluctantly agrees. Luthera talks to Colin and asks him why he let Klaus and Veruca escape. He tells her he didn't know they were evil mages and says he'll inform the Queen when they return to England. Luthera refuses to go with him and says Po needs their help. She tells Colin she watched the knights as they trained after her brother died and says she knows all their moves. She knocks him down and takes his blades from his head. Rukmini gets Wyman's attention and snatches the keys from him. She proceeds to knock him out and they leave the cell. They make their way out of the dungeon and the building begins to crumble. Klaus and Veruca break the palace door and enter the building as the Emperor complains. Luthera fights Colin and he tells her she will never be a knight. She says she will take Klaus and Veruca to the Queen, and he reminds her that the Queen wants her in handcuffs. He begins to overpower her and tries to knock her off the cliff. She then uses the skill she learned from Po and knocks him to the ground. Luthera picks the sword from the ground and points it at Colin. He says a true knight will spare an enemy, and she ties him to a tree. He tells her he will find her, and she says he'll have to chew through the ropes. Po and Mr. Ping enter the temple and see Klaus and Veruca fight and defeat the guards. He approaches the siblings and says they'll feel his thunder. Klaus tells Po that thunder is a sound and it can't do anything to them. They begin fighting and Po struggles to fight against both of them. Mr. Ping decides to help Po and the siblings make fun of him and his previous partner. Rukmini emerges as the Emperor tries to run away, and she takes the whip from him. She leaves the palace with the whip, and Po continues fighting Klaus and Veruca. Luthera makes her way to the palace and jumps on some ropes. Veruca insults Luthera and tells Po how she betrayed him. She says Luthera made him lose his title and made the entire country hate him. Luthera gets to the palace compound and rushes towards the building. Po gets angry and charges at Veruca. She runs to him with the gauntlet and Po punches her hand. The punch creates a shockwave that pushes Luthera as she tries to enter the palace. She hits a rock and looks at the palace in shock. The Emperor holding on to Rukmini's sled as she escapes. He tries to grab the whip that transforms into a staff, but is unable to. Klaus and Veruca emerge on a different sled and try to take the whip from Rukmini. Rukmini holds the whip and prepares to attack the siblings, while Veruca activates the gauntlet and prepares to attack. The Emperor realizes he will be caught in the crossfire and screams for the Dragon Knight to save him. Luthera enters the palace and sees as Mr. Ping treats Po. He tells her that Klaus and Veruca are pursuing Rukmini, and she asks what happened to him. Mr. Ping says Po got injured as he was cleaning up her mess. She tries to apologize, and Po asks if the Knight's Code and everything she said was a lie. Luthera tells Po that her brother died because of her, and she has to make things right. Luthera tells Po how a knight came to their house to call Alfred. He tells Alfred that Klaus and Veruca are attacking, and Alfred leaves the house. Young Luthera steps out and says she wants to help him fight their enemy. Alfred tells her he names his sword Luthera's shield and says it's made to defend her. He says his mission is to protect her and instructs her to remain in the house. She ignores his instruction and follows him into the woods. Luthera sees some unconscious knights and watches as Alfred fights Klaus and Veruca. They take his sword and attack him, but Luthera emerges and tells them not to harm her brother. Alfred grabs her and says she shouldn't be there, and Veruca uses a vine to stab him with his sword. In the palace, Luthera blames herself for her brother's death, and she says they have to avenge her brother's death. Po tells her not to blame herself because she was a child when her brother died. He says she doesn't need to lie to him and that they have a mission to complete. Luthera asks Po if he's still going to help her, and he says he will. Meanwhile, Rukmini uses the whip to fight off Klaus and Veruca. Veruca destroys the obstacles in front of them using the gauntlet, and the Emperor climbs onto the sled. Po and Luthera see that they'll have to catch up to Rukmini and the siblings and wonder what they'll do. Mr. Ping emerges and says he'll follow Po everywhere he goes. Po tells them he has an idea, and they go to Zen's cell. Luthera carries Zen, and Wyman handcuffs himself to Po. He says he won't let Po escape, and Po says he'll regret his decision. The group moves down the mountain rapidly in a sled, and fireworks propel them. Zen gets on a different sled and leaves the palace. The group rushes and catches up to Rukmini and the siblings. Veruca knocks them down while Mr. Ping flies above them. He gets on the sled as they climb on and says he will control it. Po asks Mr. Ping if he knows how to control a sled, and he tells Po he has won the sled championship 3 times in a row. He uses his skills to reach the siblings and does a barrel roll to get ahead of them. They move beside Rukmini, and Po uses Wyman as a weapon to attack her. She grabs the Emperor and uses him to defend herself. Wyman grabs the Emperor, but they hit a 3 and realize Colin is tied to 3. Veruca uses her powers to control vines that knocks Po's sled and Rukmini's sled to the ground. Rukmini gets stuck under the sled, and the whip is between Po and the siblings. Po rushes and receives the whip before the siblings can get to it. Luthera tells them to give up because they're the only mages left, and they won't be able to defeat the knights. Veruca laughs, and they tell Po and Luthera their true intentions. They say that the legendary warriors made weapons to trap the souls of their enemies. They say that they'll summon the souls when they gather the 4 weapons and use them to defeat all their enemies. Veruca asks Po to join them, but he refuses. A fight ensues, and Po fights Klaus while Luthera fights Veruca. Luthera says she has waited for 15 years to defeat them, and Veruca says she's the reason they're still alive. She says they'd be dead if she didn't distract her brother, and they continue fighting. Po struggles as he fights Klaus because Klaus attacks his injured hand. He falls to the ground, and Mr. Ping pushes Klaus away using snowballs. Po stands beside Luthera and says he's getting the hang of using the whip. Veruca grabs it as he swings it around and slams it into the ground using the gauntlet. The shockwave pushes everyone to the ground, and they eventually stand up. Po searches for the whip and realizes that Klaus retrieved it. He tells Luthera they have to leave, but she refuses. And Klaus knocks her down with the whip. Po tries to convince Veruca to stop fighting, but she refuses and knocks him down. Klaus and Veruca walk to the ship, and Rukmini grabs Klaus's leg and makes him fall. She takes the whip, but he grabs it from her, and they go to the ship. Luthera rushes as the ship moves, and she grabs its chain. She stops it from moving, and Veruca prepares to throw a dagger at her. Po rushes and uses Luthera's sword to deflect the dagger and cut the chain. The siblings escape with the weapons, and Luthera hugs Po. She thanks him for saving her and apologizes for lying. They realize that the siblings have 2 weapons, but Rukmini emerges and reveals that she has the whip. She says they switched it, and Po asks if she will help. To stop the siblings, Mr. Ping emerges and says they have to return home. Po refuses and says he'll have to help in stopping the siblings from taking over the world. They decide to follow Klaus and Veruca, and Luthera says they'll have to leave China to continue their journey. The end. Thank you so much for watching. Check out these other videos and make sure to subscribe and tap that bell icon to be notified about our latest videos. We'll see you next time.